Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So the past 2 weeks I've been reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. So I believe this is my third time reading Anna Karenina. I don't know why I've read Anna Karenina 3 times, but I haven't read War and Peace once. But I keep coming back to this one. This is becoming one of my favorite books. And I do want to say I've noticed lately with some of the longer novels that I've been revisiting, I am much less likely to get bored at any point in the reading. I think I've sort of trained myself out of losing my attention span with a longer novel. So you definitely can do that if 800 pages feels like a lot. You can kind of build up to it to a certain point. Because I've read a lot of really long books lately, and I know a few years ago it was not as easy as it seems now. I think one of the reasons why this is one of my favorites is because there's so much to it. There's so many different plot lines and characters going on, and there's a lot of different ways you can interpret it and read it. And again, I've noticed with this book that my most recent reading is very different than how I read it in the past. So it stays really fresh for me, even though I've now read it 3 times. It felt like a very different experience every time. So of course, the title character, Anna Karenina, she is a society woman who falls from graces because she has an affair with a man named Vronsky. She has this very upright husband in Karenina. And then the other central character who's kind of the foil to Anna is Levin, who is a wealthy landowner who lives in the country and runs his farm and really struggles being in society and going to town. And his main conflicts in the book is that he's in love with this girl, Kitty, who is initially attracted to Vronsky, and also Levin has all of these internal philosophical dilemmas. He's a very introspective character, and that's kind of what we love about Levin, and also something that makes his life more difficult than it needs to be. And Anna and Levin are connected by their mutual relationships with Oblonsky and his family. And then there are all kinds of side characters going on. I do remember the first time I read this, it took a little while getting into the book to sort of figure out all the Russian names, because a lot of them have like all of these different nicknames that people call them and they go by, and then several characters have very similar names. I guess because this is my third reading, I didn't really have any issues with that this time, but with any of the Russian novelists, just figuring out the names is kind of the first hurdle. So on this reading, I saw a lot of the characters differently. I'm definitely still sympathetic for Anna, but I am much less sympathetic than I was the first couple times I read this book. Because you see, particularly in the latter half of this book, Anna kind of letting her baser emotions take control of her. And, you know, she kind of shows this capacity to be cruel a little bit towards the end. Vronsky, I don't like Vronsky at all anymore. I don't remember thinking quite so horribly of him when I'd read it before. But it's just his whole courtship with Anna, she initially tries not to give him what he wants, and he just keeps coming back and keeps professing his love over and over again until he wears her down. And then he stops loving her as much at some point, and it's like, ugh. And even though there's still a lot bad about Anna's husband, Karenin, he does have some redeeming moments that I think make him a more interesting and complicated character. Like when Anna is sick about halfway through the novel after she gives birth to Vronsky's child, Karenin comes and his instinct is to love and forgive, and he's sort of described as having this really Christian kind of feeling of forgiveness for her despite everything that's happened. And I also think it's a really interesting part of his character that he loves this baby that is Vronsky's daughter, and in the end he ends up taking the daughter and raising her himself, which I think is really, really interesting. Of course, he is too easily influenced by other people in society, and also, you know, shows his cruelness in a lot of it. But in his relations with Anna, because Tolstoy gives us so many perspectives, we can see how a lot of what Anna perceives as coldness and cruelty is just Karenin not being capable of expressing himself. He just has this kind of social awkwardness that comes off as cold. So he's become a much more interesting character, certainly less villainous the more I've read this. And I've just come to love Levin as a character so much. And it's interesting, coming into the book, I was prepping for the Levin sections to be boring. That's how I had remembered it, and then being just sort of like philosophical pondering and not that much going on. And then as I was reading it this time, I kept thinking, okay, where does those like really long, boring sections come in? And interestingly, it didn't really happen until like the last 30 pages of the book. So in the last 30 pages, Levin is having kind of this existential crisis because he doesn't have any religious belief, and so he's wondering what's the point of life, basically. And he does come to like sort of a positive, healthy conclusion in the end, but it's just like a long section of him just thinking this over. And even now, as I got through the rest of the book pretty quickly and painlessly, that section was not the most fun to read. And it's interesting that that comes right at the very end, and in my memory of it, all of Levin was like that. So Anna becoming a fallen woman obviously is like a main plot point in this. It's an interesting section. There's a lot going on and a lot of factors that contribute to it. Sort of the inherent unfairness of divorce law for women in this time period is interesting, very apparent that she really had no choice. And so it's interesting that a lot of her conflict with Vronsky comes out of her feeling like he is still free to leave her and he has no obligation to her. Where on the other hand, she is completely belonging to him and has no other options but him. Also, something that I don't feel like people talk about a lot with Anna Karenina, but seems to be really important to why she ends up taking her life at the end of the novel, is that she's addicted to morphine. So from the point in the middle of the novel, when she is really ill and they think she's dying and they give her morphine, she's taking it every night to go to sleep, and she's clearly addicted to it. It kind of happens on like the periphery of her life initially, and then we see it be more and more apparent in all of the Anna sections of the novel. And then in kind of her last few days, she's gone a little bit mad. She's disconnected from reality. And I think that's an interesting factor to be included in this. So something that I love about Anna Karenina is that there's so many beautiful moments with really lovely language. And Anna's death scene, there's this moment where she's about to throw herself onto the train tracks, and she imagines like jumping into the water when she was a kid, and she has this like moment of childlike innocence and elation, which was a really beautiful moment for that dark scene, and I think tells us a lot about Anna. Another beautiful moment that comes pretty early in the novel that has always stood out to me is the first time we see Levin catch sight of Kitty, the woman he loves. So there's this pretty famous line that's something like, he didn't look at her as if she was the sun, and yet he still saw her like the sun. That's not exactly it, that's a paraphrase, but it's a really beautiful romantic moment that has stuck with me. And then I also really love this whole scene where Levin is working with the peasants that he's hired to mow the hay in his land, and he's joining in even though he's like a nobleman, and that's kind of a strange thing for him to do. But he just gets this peace from kind of turning his brain off and doing real work with his hands, because that's something concrete. Levin can understand that kind of work, whereas he doesn't understand these sort of society office jobs that a lot of the other noblemen have. So there are so many really beautiful, gorgeous little moments of writing that stand out in here. So it explores a lot of big questions, and it doesn't always give like one clear answer, which I do like about this. I mean, I can see this book being interpreted in a lot of different ways because of it, but we're seeing religious and moral questions and questions about women's rights and lots of big issues being thrown into the mix of this novel. So something that is really interesting to me in this book and in a lot of kind of the classic Russian literature is this question of what it means to be Russian, what is Russian culture, and how do they deal with the influences of European culture on Russia. Which I find those issues really interesting to read about. We're definitely seeing Levin as a character who kind of embraces Russian culture more and sort of learns about the failings of modernization and things like that. And then Anna and Vronsky, when they're living in the country, their whole house is described as being very European and everything's very luxe, and those characters are kind of miserable. So I think that says something about where Leo Tolstoy stands on that issue. So something really interesting about Leo Tolstoy that like really shows his mastery is the way he handles perspective. So in like a ballroom scene, the perspective will switch like 10 different times. You're seeing the same room from so many different perspectives. He even, in one part of the book, spends a couple pages from the eyes of Levin's dog, which is really interesting. But he's jumping around so much, and one character will look at another character, and then the perspective will switch to who they're looking at. And it seems complicated, but it works seamlessly in this novel. I think, you know, the world of Anna Karenina is really interesting. It's interesting to see the contrast between the society worlds and like the realms of Moscow and Petersburg as compared to this sort of grounded, real world kind of feel of Levin's home in the country. So in the end, Levin turns out to be right about a lot, and he finds sort of peace and contentment, love and happiness and all of that in his life. So there is a movie adaptation of Anna Karenina, which I really, really love. You know, all movies are inevitably going to leave some things out. They don't have as much freedom as a miniseries to really like stay close on the source material. But I feel like Joe Wright's Anna Karenina really understands the spirit of the novel. I think it gets at a lot of the bigger issues and does it really well. The characters are really well executed. And I also think it's such a beautiful, artful movie. It's definitely worth watching. And I do sort of trust Joe Wright as a director in general based on this and Pride and Prejudice, which I think is probably the only feature-length adaptation that I really, really love. He's just really great at getting at sort of the heart of the novel, even if he can't include every single detail. Like in Anna Karenina, the moment that I described with Levin seeing Kitty and that being such a momentous, beautifully written moment, even though we don't have those words, I think we still get the same feeling from the movie, which I think is really impressive, and there are lots and lots of examples of that. So I really love these sprawling novels that I can really spend some time with. I like falling into this world and being with these characters for a couple weeks. It suits my reading style for sure. I would like to say, you know, anyone can read really long, giant novels. It might feel strange initially, but you can get used to it and sort of make your attention span hold for 800 pages in tiny print. And yes, Anna herself is a really tragic character, but I don't think the reputation that Anna Karenina has of being just kind of like a depressing, cold Russian novel is true. There's a lot of light and a lot of warmth in here too. Yes, there's tragedy in it, but there's so much more going on that I wouldn't classify this as a particularly depressing novel. Okay, so that's all I have for this week. Thanks for watching.